Hey guys, welcome back to our third enrichment lesson. Today we are going to be talking about body systems, which is kind of fun. Hopefully I get to go a little bit more in depth than I did in class because a lot of what y'all did in class was inquiry lessons. So if you didn't learn body systems right the first time, this is your second chance to really understand how the body works. And I will try and go into as much detail as possible without going over my 30-minute lesson limit that I've put. So I want to be consistent and always have 30-minute lessons. Again, I always am going to start with my calendar. Today is the 27th, and I am recording this video the morning of the 27th. So just so y'all know, you do have a quiz due tonight, and it will be due at midnight. If you don't get it in by that time, please just communicate. I will give you extra time if you need to do that. Please just communicate with me, and I'll open it back up. But technically, it is due Friday at midnight. And then on Monday, that's when you can log in at 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. For that every other day Zoom lesson. Okay. And then we will continue body systems on the 31st, and then we'll be done with it. So I wanted to start body systems by talking about levels of organization. It's important to understand that the human body is organized at different levels, starting with the cell. So if we were to break the human body down to the smallest unit, it would be the cell. And it would obviously end, the largest unit would be the whole organism as a whole. At each higher level of organization, there's a greater degree of complexity. So again, the cell is pretty complex, but tissues are even more complex. Organs get even more complex. And so we're going to go through those really quickly. Again, we start with a cell. The human body is made up of many different types of cells. We have blood cells, skin cells, bone cells, nerve cells, muscle cells, skeletal, columnar, epithelial, and goblet cells. Those are basically what make up the inner lining of your organs. But again, these are not the limit. There's a lot more different types of cells in our body as well that make up all the different organs and bones, everything in our whole body. The next level is tissues. When we have a group of cells that are connected and they're working towards a similar function, then we call that a tissue. Okay, so we actually have four different types of tissues. We've got connective tissue, muscle tissue, nerve tissue, and epithelial tissue. The next level of organization that we have is organs and organ systems. So when we have two or more types of those tissues, again, two or more types of those tissues working together to do the same job, that's actually going to make up an organ, okay? And an organ can be in things like brain, your heart, your lungs, your skin, kidneys, your stomach, your esophagus, lots of different things. The human organs are then obviously organized into organ systems, and we've learned about these organ systems before. An organ system is just a group of organs that work together to carry out an overall function. So you kind of see this overlying theme as we get more complex, we are continually working towards a similar function. So these are the 11 body systems that we talked about. And obviously the ones in green are the ones that I'm going to try to talk about today. And then the ones in red are going to be on our part 2 lesson. Obviously there's 6, and they're like the 6 big ones. So I will try and get through. If I don't hit the last one or the second to last one, we'll just bump those to the next lesson, and I will be quicker next time. But we're going to start with those first 2, respiratory and circulatory. Okay. The big idea, and the reason that we always usually pair these together, you can see the respiratory and the circulatory system right here, is that the human body requires oxygen and nutrients, which are supplied by the respiratory system and transported through the body by the circulatory system. So again, we really like to pair these together. And the whole purpose of that is so that all the cells in your body can make energy through cellular respiration. Okay, and I don't think that when we taught this last time, we remembered what cellular respiration is. And hopefully my writing just popped up, but this is actually the process in cells that converts chemical energy into a usable form, such as ATP. So usually we're going from food or sugar into ATP. And again, our cells need ATP to carry out all the metabolic reactions in our body. So this is considered maintaining homeostasis because our cells need energy in order to function. So the respiratory and the circulatory system help get energy to all of our cells so that we can maintain homeostasis. Now, the respiratory system, obviously its whole main idea is gas exchange. And obviously the gases that we are exchanging are carbon dioxide and oxygen. We have all the different parts of the respiratory system here. Obviously, when you take a breath in, that's going to go through your nose or your mouth or your trachea. Your nose or your mouth. It's going to travel down your trachea, which is this part right here, and enter into your lungs. On the next slide, I should have a close-up of the lungs. Yes, I do. And so I wanted to give y'all a little bit more in-depth explanation of what's happening here. So hopefully I'll have enough time to do that. But we're going to talk about the pathway of air. The first pathway of air is obviously through the nasal cavity, which actually contains these things called goblet cells and ciliated epithelial cells that actually move mucus and trap debris, and they work in tandem together. They work together. The next step is the pharynx is at the beginning of the throat or the nasal cavity. And if you've ever taken a big gulp of water and it actually feels like you went down the wrong pipe, it might have gone down your trachea, which is right here. And so your pharynx and your epiglottis actually control and divert what's air, what needs to go to the trachea, and what's food and water, what needs to go to the esophagus, which is kind of interesting. If the epiglottis and the pharynx know that it's air, it's going to send it to the larynx. And the larynx is going to receive the air, and that's actually where your voice box is contained. That's the upper respiratory tract. It refers to the nasal cavity, the pharynx, and the larynx. So all of this is the upper respiratory tract. On the other hand, the esophagus, again, it receives food and connects to the stomach. So we're going to talk about that when we talk about the digestive system. The next area that it goes to is going to be the trachea. And it's below the larynx, so this would be where the trachea is, right here. And it has reinforced cartilage along with ciliated epithelial cells to filter the air. Next are the two main left and right bronchi. So obviously we see bronchi right here. And those are going to be the next on our pathway. Bronchi lead into even smaller branches called the bronchioles, and eventually they lead to the alveoli. And all of those parts make up the lower respiratory tract, and that is actually going to where we have the gas exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. We didn't talk about this, but the gas exchange is actually due to partial pressure, which is really, really interesting, if I can spell partial right. If you remember that things or diffusion goes from areas of high pressure, simple diffusion, high to low. So that's how that gas exchange happens. There's a change in pressure in your lungs when you take in a breath and when you release a breath. So that was a lot more than we talked about beforehand. So we're going to kind of do something similar with the circulatory system. The circulatory system, we know that it's made up of the heart's veins, arteries, capillaries, red blood cells, and we transport materials like oxygen to cells and transport waste like carbon dioxide away from cells. But I wanted to give you, I wanted to let you know what these arteries, capillaries, and veins do specifically. So we have arteries, veins, and capillaries. They're the three main transport, vessels in the circulatory system. Arteries actually move blood away from the heart. And I like to think arteries away. That's how you remember it. Veins move blood towards the heart. Obviously, it needs to be the opposite of an artery. And then capillaries actually are the small branches. They are vessels that are actually only one cell thick, so they're really, really thin. And this is also where gas and nutrients are diffused from inside cells into the blood. So this is kind of where we get that transport of waste and of nutrients. So really quickly, I wanted to talk about the flow of blood through the heart because it's a really cool process. So we have blood from the body that's going to come in through the superior vena cava right here and also through the inferior vena cava. And it is going to move as I'm drawing. This is going to be deoxygenated blood because it's coming from the body and it doesn't have oxygen anymore. So it's actually going to pass through this tricuspid valve, which is really cool because it's attached to something called papillary muscles. And these papillary muscles actually close this valve and prevent backflow, so they prevent the blood from flowing back up. We don't want that. And then the blood will now be in the right ventricle. The right ventricle is then going to pump. Remember, the heart is a muscle, and so it's going to contract and pump the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary artery. Remember, arteries are pumping blood away from the heart, so we see it leaving here. This is when the blood is going to go into pulmonary circulation, which just means, I like to say, it's going to the lungs. So here's where it's going to go to the lungs. The lungs, obviously the blood will be oxygenated, and it's going to come back. And it's going to come back through that left atrium right here. So it has to travel through the pulmonary veins. Again, veins are blood traveling toward the heart. It's going to go through this mitral valve. And again, those papillary muscles are going to prevent backflow. And it's going to go into the left ventricle. The ventricle is the most muscular chamber of the heart. This is actually going to pump oxygenated blood into the aorta right here and into systemic circulation, which just means to your body. Okay, now we're going to move on to the immune system. Hopefully that was a little fun and new information along with some old information. So the immune system is obviously our way that our body fights off pathogens. And we talked about pathogens last time, or on our first video. Pathogens are any disease-causing agent, such as bacteria, viruses. It can even be a fungus, like if you get athlete's feet. So it could be any of those things, but it has to cause a disease. Now, our immune system is going to be the thing that fights off pathogens. So it's made up of these white blood cells, we call them WBCs a lot, and skin. Your skin is your primary barrier to getting any of these types of pathogens inside your body. So usually pathogens have to enter through an opening, such as your eyes, your nose, your mouth, or your ears even. So it has to enter through an opening in your body. Their whole job, again, is to fight off foreign invaders. But they are made up of all these different cells, and we're going to talk about some of those. We have T cells, B cells, and macrophages. On my next slide, I have all of the different cells of the immune system, and it's a lot. We're not going to talk about all of them, but I kind of want to get more specific than we did beforehand. So what's kind of interesting is we have leukocytes, which are, again, our white, that wasn't supposed to happen, which are our white blood cells. And then we have lymphocytes, which are white blood cells mainly found in the lymphatic organs. And those lymphatic organs are going to be T cells, B cells, and natural killer cells. Those actually originate from bone marrow, which is why bones are actually a major part in interaction with the immune system. But basically, when you have these different cells and they come across a pathogen or a bacteria, the first cell that basically announces an alarm is this mast cell, all the way down here. And the mast cell is a type of leukocyte, so it's a type of white blood cell that is responsible for the first part of the inflammatory response. And we call it like a rallying signal. It actually starts inflammation, and it kind of lets the body know that there's something here that we need to fight off. That mast cell is going to be backed up by the other basically 5 types of leukocytes, which are, again, different types of blood cells. And we have a little mnemonic device: never let monkeys eat bananas. I'm going to write it up here. Never let monkeys eat bananas. And what's kind of interesting is over here has the highest number of white blood cells, and over here has the lowest. So we're going to go through these. The first N stands for neutrophil. And those have an innate immunity and make up over half of leukocytes. The next one is going to be our lymphocytes. That's what our L is. Now our lymphocytes are all right here. B, T, and natural killer. So I'm going to put, that's my purple. So B and T cells are part of adaptive immunity, so they can actually adapt and start attacking specific things, while natural killer cells are part of your innate immunity and attack virally infected cells, cancerous cells, and things like that. M stands for macrophages and monocytes, so I'll do that in blue. We have a monocyte and a macrophage down here for our M. They're part of the adaptive immunity. Our E stands for eosinophils, which are part of our innate immunity, and they actually can be released to kill pathogens, especially parasites. So we will see those right here, eosinophils. And then we have basophils, which are the least number of leukocytes. And here we have the different interactions. We talked about how the immune system can pair up with the integumentary. Again, the skin is the first preventative thing from letting pathogens in. We talked about how the skeletal can make up all of those white blood cells that we just talked about. What has to circulate those white blood cells is going to be our circulatory system, so that plays a major role in the immune system. And then also, we didn't talk about the lymphatic system, but the lymphatic system basically filters interstitial fluid that's not inside cells, that's just kind of around the cells, that carries a lot of bacteria and pathogens. And that lymphatic tissue will actually filter out a lot of those invaders out of the blood. So that plays a major role as well. The next system that we're going to talk about is our nervous system. It seems like the most simple, but it's probably the most important. It only has 4 major organs: the brain, the spinal cord, neurons or nerve cells, you'll hear it both, and then the hypothalamus, which is in the brain. The whole function of this is to gather and interpret information. And it responds to stimuli. So the example I always give is, if you touch a hot stove, how does your body know to pull your arm back? Well, that's because of the nervous system. It's this system of signaling. Now, this is a picture of a neuron, and it's actually a picture of a close-up neuron and how they're communicating with each other. And what we actually see is this is a neuron, and it's carrying a signal. And what this close-up picture is showing us is the signal transferring to the second neuron, which is the full one right here. So basically the signal is coming from here, it's coming down, and it's transporting to this next neuron. Now, how that happens is there's a lot of different moving parts. We call this the presynaptic neuron. It's going to send signals and release neurotransmitters, which actually are what carry the signal. So if you see, those neurotransmitters are being carried by vesicles to the edge of the cell and being released. And the postsynaptic neuron is going to receive the signal by interacting with the released neurotransmitters. And you see there's little, they almost look like protein channels that we saw in the cell membrane. So remember, cell membrane looked like this. And so again, this is just, a neuron is just another type of cell. And so it could have a protein channel where that neurotransmitter, let's put it in green because those are in green, is going to travel right through from the outside of the cell, this is outside, into the neuron. Just like that, through those, this could be a protein. So I did want to teach y'all a couple parts of this neuron. The part over here that actually receives the signaling, and it looks like it almost has like spidery arms. I'm going to do this in green. This is a dendrite, and that is actually what receives the signal. In yellow, this is our soma, or our cell body of our neuron. It's our cell body, and that blue in the middle is obviously the inside of the cell, the main control center. That's going to be our, if you said in your brain, nucleus, pat yourself on the back. And all the way down at this other end, I'm going to do it in purple. Those are our axons. That actually is going to be this postsynaptic neuron, this axon terminal. That's where our signal is going to leave the neuron. But in conclusion, the nervous system, how it interacts with other systems is it basically interacts with all of them. It controls all of their systems. The main thing that you want to remember is that this hypothalamus, that's inside our brain. That's a little part inside our brain that helps maintain homeostasis by working with those systems. Now, these signals wouldn't be moved, they wouldn't be transported without the hypothalamus sending those signals. So those neurotransmitters that actually carry the signal through the nervous system, it's the hypothalamus that's sending those signals. And they will send those signals if they receive a signal that your body's out of the temperature, it's thirsty, it's hungry, it needs sleep, or any type of emotion, it will send these different signals. I'm going to race through these last two systems just so that I can post this video on time. The endocrine system is made up of a lot of different glands in the body, such as the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the thyroid, the thymus, and even parts of the reproductive system like the ovaries and the testes. These glands produce hormones. And if y'all don't remember what a hormone is, I'm going to underline it right here. It is basically a chemical signal. Okay, so it's how our body is regulating different activities through chemical signaling. So we call them neurotransmitters. And how we just saw them move around, that's what is released, these hormones. They can be slow, they can have a slow response, and they're usually long-lasting. So there's different types of these signaling. These signals can be released through the bloodstream, and so that's going to be our endocrine signaling. If the hormone is released through the endocrine signaling, that's through the bloodstream, which is what we were talking about. But there's also two other kinds that I didn't mention in class before. Paracrine, it's to neighboring cells, so it's not going very far. And then autocrine is on the same cell that is secreting that hormone, which is weird. We're not going to talk about it. But an example of paracrine signaling is when you cut yourself and blood clotting factors call out to neighboring platelets. Basically, they'll call out to their neighbors. Those cells release platelets, and so it's able to form a blood clot really quickly so that it stops bleeding quickly. Without paracrine signaling, that blood clot wouldn't be able to form really quickly, and it would take a lot longer for, let's say, a paper cut or something to scab up. So if we had to wait for endocrine, if we had to wait for a hormone to travel through the blood to get to bring us some platelet cells, then that would take a lot longer. So there's a time and a place for all of these different ones, but specifically endocrine is the one that we talked about in class and how hormones are released through the bloodstream. We're not going to talk about this picture, so if you were excited about it, I'm sorry. We just running out of time very fast. The endocrine system, again, specifically how the endocrine that we talked about through the bloodstream, it needs to be able to interact with the circulatory system to transport those hormones through the bloodstream. It needs to interact with the nervous system to know what hormones to release. Again, some of those areas, the ovaries and the testes, are going to pair up with the reproductive system, which we're going to talk about next. And then lastly, the skeletal system controls bone growth. So through calcitonin, it helps regulate bone growth. Okay, cool. So we have our reproductive system here. It's made up of gonads. If you remember what gonads are, those are just sex cells. Not sex cells, sex organs. What am I thinking? So those are sex organs. So we have the ovaries and the testes. So ovaries for females and testes for males. It allows organisms to reproduce, which is kind of the main point, and prevents the species from going extinct. One thing that I didn't get a chance to talk about in class, but is actually one of the coolest things about the female body, is the menstrual cycle and how it is correlated to the hormones. So again, the endocrine system and the reproductive system go hand in hand. And so this is kind of showing a monthly cycle of the female hormones. And what's kind of crazy is that there's all of these different glands releasing different hormones. So for example, at the beginning of the cycle, FH over here is actually released, FSH is actually released by the anterior pituitary gland, while the hypothalamus releases another gland to signal to the anterior pituitary gland to release this. So there's a lot of, this has to release, and then this one has to release and respond to that. But it's kind of cool. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you can kind of follow it. There's 7 to 8 days of menstruation, and then the hormones are at this level. During the period of ovulation, LH gets really, really high, and you can Google why that is. But it's just kind of cool to see the interactions between the hormones and what's happening in the body as well. And then lastly, we have interactions between the reproductive system. So we have obviously, look what we just talked about. The main interaction is the endocrine system. It controls the production of those sex cells. So those different hormones play a huge role in the reproductive system and how it functions correctly. And then the last one is the muscular system, specifically when the uterus is contracting to give birth, which is again controlled by another hormone, oxytocin. So hormones play a gigantic role in the reproductive system. So this video will be posted on Google Classroom. You will not have a worksheet specifically for part 1, but you'll have a worksheet and a class activity to do for all of body systems, and then you'll also have a homework for body systems. So you can start on that right now, or you can wait until I post the part 2 video on Tuesday. That's up to you. But you do have a quiz due tonight. Which is again 3:27, due at midnight, due at 12 a.m. or 11:59. So make sure y'all get a chance to do that. Okay, have a great day.